Hello world! Curses of madness be upon you all for live fighters. I doubt I'm alone in saying that Apex Legends The First Ship was a less engaging story than Season 5's The Broken Ghost. But today I want to take a look at why this was the case, so as to offer some ideas on how Respawn can adapt for the future, but also how we as a community can temper our expectations as well. Full disclosure, I enjoyed The First Ship. I think saying that it was rushed, not thought out, or even filler isn't doing it justice in the slightest. And according to the writers and their cryptic teasings, its story might not even have finished just yet. But still, the comic portion of The First Ship that we got was near objectively less engaging than the story of The Broken Ghost. And there are several pretty clear reasons why. I'm going to start with the way the two stories were released, before looking at the mediums used for each, and finally the content of the stories themselves. And when it came to how we received said stories, there's two distinct differences to be found, in the treasure packs and the gameplay missions. Now, I don't begrudge them not using gameplay this season. The story at hand doesn't fit that kind of structure yet, and they have said multiple times it was an early experiment. But for what it was much more clearly built to be directly invested in, not only getting you involved directly in the story, but also having you unlock the expanded story through that novel linked gameplay. And when you only had to get 5 packs in a week to unlock a PvE mission and a written story, it means that playing every day in Season 6 to get treasure packs just from the base game, just to see a few comic panels, feels like a massive step back in comparison. I would recommend stepping back to the 5 per week model for the sake of the community's actual investment in the game, so it feels less like a chore or an empty excuse to jump into a match. It also reduces the risk of people falling behind and losing interest from lack of exposure, or feeling pressured to work Apex into their daily schedule. The people most interested in the story aren't as likely to be the ones playing daily, as the game itself isn't really their primary interest. And it's here that we'll come to the different mediums used for each season, which each have their own benefits and detriments for different readers. For instance, some people just don't like reading, but written prose will often offer a more concrete exploration of character than images can truly convey, while also allowing for greater understanding in the progressing plot itself. Comics can also benefit here by making you responsible for digging into the representation at hand to determine the truth of the matter, but the written word will conjure more imagination from the reader themselves, so as to immerse them more fully in the story and promote further interpretations of the material. Both forms are inherently great at what they do, and they both work especially well for the character-driven sci-fi nonsense that is Apex Legends. However, where Season 6 can feel like it falls short here is in the scale of the material each medium was able to offer, with The Broken Ghost undeniably providing more raw, meaty content, despite the comics working in our favour to help us move through the relative downtime of The First Ship more smoothly. However, given the heavy focus on interpersonal relationships in Season 6, this could well have been explored substantially in Prose as well, potentially giving us more actual introspection and therefore content from the characters at hand. This was a huge strength of The Broken Ghost, which compounded on that by using a different POV character for each chapter. But size obviously isn't everything. I'm sure there are many who will appreciate the visual medium of the comics for their ease of reading and identifying more clearly with the proceedings, or for how purely visual storytelling can convey pacing, mood, and motion, or just for some of the aesthetic choices they went with, like I love this gooby little pair for instance, and fan artist Gel's season bridging comics have shown us the strength of using entirely different styles and layouts as well. Their Bloodhound piece especially works so well as a comic, because how the story is told to us matches the context and themes of the story itself. There are even specific scenes, such as Blisk and Ash's flashback in The First Ship, that can benefit narratively from being told in a visual format, as this piece in particular is able to sidestep telling us how its narrator is conveying the information, or whether they are reliable in the first place, just through how it's displayed. Adapting this to prose directly could lose that unreliable narrator angle, or make it far too clear as the way to read the scene, which would then detract from the inherent mystery of the event. However, again, on yet another side to this ever-spinning coin, the visual medium can make simply following the process of events difficult, especially when dialogue can end up so cluttered by these two rapscallions in particular. Like, I'd say that's the biggest sort of technical flaw with The First Ship's choice of medium, but the greater overall issue comes from how that relates back to the community. Many fan artists found that the comics left them little to adapt into art, which dampens the overall interest. The lack of understanding of certain parts and the development of some of these older characters has spawned a lot of discussion, but it all gets tainted by misinformation and this boring ass motherfucker. It's ultimately going to be personal preference that determines which style fits better for you as a reader. Neither is inherently a lesser medium. That said, I do think it's clear that the Broken Ghost's use of short story chapters gave us all much more of a grounding in the much bigger and more driven story, and that likely made it more engaging for most, never mind the corresponding PvE missions as simple as they were. Although if Season 6 does have a gameplay element set for its latter half, then this could change a lot of how we perceive the comics themselves as well. For future stories, I'd argue that they should aim for a middle ground between their detailed prose and the heightened aesthetics of comics, which would result in something like a visual novel. This would shore up the weaknesses of each format individually, so as to highlight their strengths, and this format even allows for greater freedom in choices of imagery specifically, as they don't have to then directly represent proceedings as a comic largely does. Just a quick side note before I dive into the actual narratives at play, the sound design for both formats personally worked really well, adding fitting ambience and sporadic effects like Loba's jump drive in Season 5, on top of some gorgeous music and voice work, really augmenting certain elements like repairing Ash, her letter to Pathfinder, and Mirage's loud mouth. Evolving voice line interactions in-game have also helped to cement the status quo as it's developed, along with the bigger things like map changes tying into their respective plotlines. That's all been done really well as far as concerned. Which brings us, rather neatly, to the storylines themselves. Why exactly, in its essence, is the Broken Ghost more engaging than the first ship? The Broken Ghost not only had the setup from Season 4 to let it hit the ground running, but that innate momentum was built on the clear focal characters of Revenant and Loba, Loba's distinct goal of revenge, the clear stakes of both her and Revenant's lives, and the allure of dimension hopping to solidify Loba's goal as our own mission. The story as a whole was specifically motivated and plot driven, but had personal stakes for multiple characters beyond even the central pair, and these regularly gave us character development and even resulted in growth for some. The Broken Ghost was always tangible, starting from a clear dilemma and reaching a distinct conclusion of its own terms. It even evolved the core of its central conflict to give Loba a new dilemma, changed both her and Revenant's goals, and developed many personal attitudes between legends. But it still brought us to a new status quo. So, if the Broken Ghost began right in its conflict and ended in a sort of peace, the first ship has been the opposite. It's begun innocuously from a relatively stable base to bring us to that further conflict. And that's not a problem. That's how the pacing of a long-form story will end up working, and so I feel it's a necessary tone setter for the future, and is likely more of a setup for a new arc to come, as like Season 4 was to the Broken Ghost. Season 6 is trying not to be the same stories that came before it exactly. However, the first ship certainly has less emotional investment right off the bat, and lacks anywhere near the kind of tangible goals that Season 5 had for us. It's more concerned with developing new relationships naturalistically, and uses a sense of mystery to lead into the core dilemma, which has largely left us with still more mysteries. That can be what draws you into a story, but for some it seems this lack of answers or context or forward momentum is frustrating. I feel that the writers must need a lot of setup before we hit Olympus, and so it's a shame that it was seemingly teased as a more immediate and tangible progression of events. The supporting cast that have become the crux of the larger plot have left us with little to go on, and the more personal, low-stakes drama of Mirage and Rampart's bet has only just given us a kind of tangible conflict and some idea of their motivations. You can take this as the pace slowing to a crawl, which may not be what we expected, but if this season again was high-octane sci-fi nonsense as well, then every season people would be expecting more of it, and there'd end up being no variety. We'd run through everyone's character arcs really damn fast, and then there'd be no point to anyone being there. Taking the time to explore these characters, old and new, focal and supporting, gives the story overall time to breathe, and gives us the understanding of those goals and motivations that will make the grander narratives more engaging when they do develop. The Broken Ghost definitely gave us far more insight than the first ship did though. The narrative introspection serving to develop character attitudes while also showcasing plot, world building and foreshadowing. the comics really don't get to do that anywhere near as well. Season 6 has felt far smaller scale directionally and emotively as a result of both its narrative drive and its format of release, and I can definitely see why that's not as interesting for some. The actual mission type nature of Season 5 also gelled really well with a video game storyline, but Season 6 does show that it's important to remember the characters are meant to be individuals, rather than a collection of skill sets or plot devices. They are all just people, and that's way more the heart and soul of Apex Legends and sci-fi in general than multi-dimensional robot waifus and finding a head in a jar. I hope we can all remember that as we go forward, and try to look at the upcoming seasons for their own merits or their own intent. Exploring how Loba comes to terms with the idea of revenge is way more worth your time than just seeing her achieve it. That, as is likely the whole point of her overall character arc, is empty. So in conclusion, I feel it is a lack of tangibility or seeming consequence that the first ship suffers from. But as we go forward, that is likely to change. That of course doesn't make it any more engaging to read in the present. I enjoyed it for what it was, and I now don't have anywhere near the defined expectations I originally had for the Apex Legends story as high-concept sci-fi nonsense, right? And that can only be a good thing. That means there's far more to this world to see, and I'm now way happier to let it flow in its own way. If you take Season 6 more as an analogue to Season 4, setting us up for things to come, sort of an up and down of a roller coaster, maybe you might find it less disappointing. I would like to see Respawn look into this though, and see if there's ways of at least making the stories feel more tangibly impactful as we go forward, even if they are still focused more on developing characters, motivations and relationships at a smaller scale. I look forward to whatever the rest of Season 6 may have on offer, and to see whether Rampart shot Mirage or not. Ash can't come back soon enough in my book, but if they didn't make me wait for her, then I wouldn't feel this way. There's got to be give and take in stories. You've got to let them ebb and flow, or they'll just drown themselves and wash away. So with that, I hope I've helped you see why Season 6 might feel less investing, but that it should also set us all up better for the long-term future of the franchise. There's plenty of ways Respawn can adapt from what they've done so far, and I'd hope that some of these issues and propositions could be taken into account for them to do so. Let me know if you have any ideas for how they can improve the first ship below, it'd at least be interesting to see it adapted into pure prose, for instance. But that's enough from me for today. Thanks for staying with me, friends. I hope you enjoyed my thoughts on this rather hefty topic. I've been Euclidean Vision, the emotional support. Take care of yourselves out there, teammates, and may the glorious light of Beskil shine within you. Bye bye.